Well, the latest attempt to let civilians escape several besieged Ukrainian cities appears to be holding for now. The first convoy of evacuees has left the city of Sumy after Ukraine and Russia agreed on a temporary ceasefire. At the same time, diplomacy remains on the table on the 13th day of the invasion. A fourth round of talks said to be on the horizon. It all comes as the humanitarian crisis mounts. The United Nations says 2 million people have fled Ukraine since the start of the invasion. Live to Ukraine and Hungary in a moment, but first, how the war has upended the lives of civilians.
More buildings turned to rubble in Ukraine. At least 9 people have been killed after another night of heavy shelling in the eastern city of Sumy. Many people are trapped in the besieged city, but there is now a way out. A civilian evacuation route has opened after an agreement by Ukraine and Russia. Moscow has also announced humanitarian corridors in 4 other cities. Kharkiv is one of them. The northeastern city has endured days of Russian bombardment. Hospital beds are mostly filled with people wounded by the constant shelling.
Понимаете, как всех пациентов, которые поступают и могут ходить, конечно, все хотят домой к своим родным и близким. Вот. А те, кто не могут идти, те, конечно, остаются здесь. Мы, к сожалению, таких подсчетов не ведем просто. Понимаете? Когда больше, когда меньше. Так что...
Russia is keeping up the offensive in Ukraine, but Kyiv says the pace of Moscow's advance has slowed significantly. Local officials say Ukrainian troops continue to defend the capital and other cities. President Volodymyr Zelensky has also vowed to stand his ground until the war is won.
Я залишаюсь тут, залишаюсь у Києві, на Банковій, не ховаючись і нікого не боюсь, стільки, скільки потрібно, щоб перемогти у цій нашій вітчизняній війні.
More than 1.7 million people have fled Ukraine since the invasion, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. The United Nations already warning 4 million are expected to be displaced. The tally has already topped 2 million.
Ukrainian journalist Andriy Dehler joins us live from Khmelnytskyi in western Ukraine. Andriy, evacuations are underway. Where are most people headed?
So right now, as far as I have heard from the ground, the reports indicating that the only active humanitarian corridor is from the city of Sumy to the city of Poltava, and that is a city that is to the south from Sumy and to the west from Kharkiv. It is a 2-way corridor, so we have people being ferried to safety in one way, and then humanitarian convoys are going the other way to provide help and support for the besieged city. From Poltava, I would expect most people to either take a train or if they have a vehicle of their own to just hit the road and go to the west. They can go via Kremenchuk, then towards the city of Khmelnytskyi, where I am, and then further to Lviv and other border regions, and then maybe cross the border to another country. So this is what I would expect at the moment.
Andriy, a lot of effort going into setting up humanitarian corridors like these in other cities, but Ukrainian officials say it has been impossible to get Russia to agree to these corridors. Why is it so difficult?
Yes, it is a really hard question. There are so many more cities right now that desperately require this kind of corridor. Those cities include, of course, Mariupol and Volnovakha, but also Kharkiv and cities under Kharkiv like Izium and so on. The only logical explanation that I could see at the moment is that Russia still harbors hopes to open corridors of their own that would actually lead into Russia itself. However, so far we have seen that neither the Ukrainian authorities nor the people in those Ukrainian cities are ready to take a corridor to Russia, to the country that is responsible for most of the damage that these cities are taking.
Well, thanks for that update. Andriy Dehler speaking from Khmelnytskyi in western Ukraine.
Well, let's go live to Lviv, Ukraine. Philip Crowther is joining us. Philip, Lviv is a vital pathway for Ukrainians fleeing the conflict. Now, how is the city handling the influx of refugees, and are those already there moving on to other destinations?
Yeah, it's getting increasingly difficult for the city to deal with what is a humanitarian catastrophe around Ukraine and on the borders that Ukraine has with several European countries, the likes of Poland, Hungary, Slovakia, but also Moldova in the south. There is an enormous amount of refugees passing through this city of Lviv. It is on the way toward Poland, for example. You can also travel from here further south. So this is essentially a transit point for a lot of refugees, and there is a limited amount of space in this city. It is as simple as that. Those who are lucky enough to have somewhere to stay, well, they can come here and take a little bit of a breather, so to say, from their arduous journey here from, say, the east of the country or from the capital, Kiev. But those who come here without a plan of accommodation, it's very, very tough for them, and they might have to move on as quickly as possible. According to the mayor of the city, it is essentially a breaking point when it comes to the capacity it has to take care of refugees arriving here in this western city. So what you have here in Lviv is cars and vans and buses moving further on toward the border with Poland, not all too far from here, but not all that easy to get a ride either. And then there's the train station, of course, which is a very, very busy place and a fraught place as well. At times, there are trains from here going to Przemyśl. That is the closest train station inside of Poland. And that is the kind of train that people will want to get on. Now, there are trains coming here from the capital, Kiev, passing through. And there is the possibility of passengers to get on board, because some who've been on those very long journeys, well, they will get off those trains, freeing up that space. But still, all of this is an enormous logistical challenge for the city of Lviv. And of course, remember that getting humanitarian aid in here is much more difficult than getting it onto the Polish side of the border. So that is a big problem for refugees here too. They have to make sure, and of course city authorities and country authorities here have to make sure that those refugees are being cared of.
And what more have we heard of diplomatic efforts that are continuing between Ukraine and Russia?
Well, look, the first thing to say is that these are two countries at war who are talking. This Monday was the third round of talks, in fact, between Ukraine and Russia. They always take place on the border between Ukraine and Belarus. Ukraine sends its defense minister. On the Russian side, it is not quite as senior a delegation that arrives there for those talks. Now, what we've seen in terms of results from those talks is, well, agreements for ceasefires and humanitarian corridors that in the past simply have not worked out. Why? Because Russia has violated those ceasefire agreements. It's as simple as that. So today is a big test, really, as to what those two sides who are at war with each other right now can actually establish. As you just heard, there are those attempts to establish new humanitarian corridors to get people out of the city of Mariupol, the city of Sumy as well, in the north of Ukraine. And we'll only know by the end of the day whether those humanitarian corridors, whether those ceasefire agreements really have been respected by Russia. There are also some offers, if you will, of humanitarian corridors coming from Russia. That was the case yesterday. This doesn't stem from talks between Russia and Ukraine. These are unilateral offers from Russia for people to leave the likes of Mariupol or Kharkiv in the north, or even the capital, Kiev. But those humanitarian corridors that were offered by Russia never really materialized. They would have led people into Russia and Belarus. You have to ask the question, how many people who've been bombed by Russian forces for over a week would actually want to evacuate toward the city that is actually putting their lives and the lives of their loved ones in danger.
Philip Crowther is in Lviv, Ukraine. Thank you for that.
With the opening of humanitarian corridors, the movement of refugees to neighboring states is expected to grow. Hungary is one of the many countries that has opened its doors. Ross Cullen joins us live from a railway station on the border between Hungary and Ukraine. Ross, it's a significant reversal of usually tough border policies. What support has Hungary extended to these refugees?
There's a lot of activity going on at the moment. I can just see disappearing down the track is a train that has been laid on a special service for people who've come to Hungary from Ukraine. It's taking them further into the country towards the capital, Budapest. Also, over here behind me is another train that is destined for Ukraine, taking people from Hungary back into Ukraine, people who are worried about relatives who want to go back into the country to look after family who are still in Ukraine, who haven't been able to flee, haven't been able to join the millions of people who now who have been trying to flee to safety, refugees from Ukraine. And where we are, Zahony is the first town you get to when you leave Ukraine in the far west of the country and you come here to far northeastern Hungary. You can see this train is just getting ready to leave. The other one has just departed. So this is a major rail transit interchange for people coming into Hungary and people also leaving Hungary who want to return to Ukraine.
Ross, it seems very orderly where you are right now, but the flood of refugees expected to grow. What has Hungary done to make sure it's ready for this influx?
But it's brought in a new decree that, in fact, supports people who are hosting people from Ukraine. So if there are Hungarians who are opening their doors to people coming in from Ukraine, they won't have to pay a tourism tax. And also there has been a loosening of some of the labour laws for people coming in from Ukraine to be able to access parts of the labour market. So we have seen a relaxation of visa laws and of temporary immigration status across the European Union. This is what Hungary has also brought in for people fleeing for their lives to Hungary. So we've seen that kind of overall governmental support. On a local level, Grace, here at the at this railway station, there are food supplies. There is a food bank. The local school has been opened up with dormitories. People have the ability to stay overnight in many locations as well. There is people who are supporting them for the United Nations Human Rights Agency. And so there is a lot of donations being given of clothing, bedding, food and drink to try to support the people who are fleeing from the Russian invasion of Ukraine and fleeing here to Hungary.
Thanks for that, Ross Cullen in Hungary on the border with Ukraine.